You need a gateway to adhering to becoming the greatest version of yourself. And to me, that's the gateway. Out of all the modalities I've ever worked with, there are no two modalities that are as transformative as putting breathwork and cold exposure together. I made a really distinctive decision that I wanted to coach people more deeply in the health landscape, mainly women in the beginning. I went to Laird and Gabby's house.
Yeah.
XPT, what's this thing? It was like cold and then weights in the pool and sauna and all this shit's going on. Remember, I'm like coaching a bunch of women and in the health space around nutrition, around fitness, and certifications and all the nonsense. Then I go to Laird's and I'm like, oh, this is what athletes are training like. And all these big, strong surfer dudes are like trying to be nice to me, but they're all like, this girl's dragging us down. And I know that like the next big things that are going to happen are going to be that we have ice baths. I was like, I'm going in, I'm head dunking on the in, I'm head dunking on the out, and I'm going to do it like a Zen Buddhist. And watch every one of those guys have the same thought. Oh shit, she just did that so well, I have to do it at least that good. And then I was like hooked. I started weaving cold and breath into all the women's work. Instantaneously started seeing women adhere better, people's mood shifts, seeing people drop stress just from the breath and cold.
I got so many questions for you. I don't incorporate any breath work into my cold. Your thoughts on cold after training, stunts hypertrophy, and yada, yada, yada. One has to do with women in cold versus men, where they are in their cycle, premenopausal, postmenopausal. I'll let you just unpack that.
Stroke, literally the BROAD, broad stroke. More and more I'm starting to see this. So if anyone's not into this, unfollow me now.
And so what happened originally that created the kind of, the situation dentally for you that you needed surgery?
Well, what happened mainly was that a few of my teeth had like fallen out or cracked, or I needed to have a crown, and I didn't want to. After I had I went to initial dentist and had the surgery, and that just went awry. And so I knew I needed to get more dental work. But then after that surgery, I was too afraid to go back, just to speak plainly. Yeah.
A, understandable. B, my story is way different. But like I have teeth that have chipped. One was I was eating a peach and there was a little bit of the pit in there and it cracked a piece off.
Yeah.
And then about 6 weeks ago, I was, cleaning with like one of those plackers and I caught one of these back. I don't know which tooth it was, but it clipped off just a sliver of the tooth.
And you're like, what's happening?
And so now every time I eat, Peyton is so annoyed, but like I got to get the stuff it's thick enough where it's easy to get it out. But I try to be discreet about cleaning out the food, but I've probably got 2 other chips, which I just don't think are probably going to be fixed with just throwing some sort of filling type thing on. I think I need like real work.
Yeah.
And so to your point, without even dealing with any of the trauma, it's like, I don't want to fucking deal with it. And then finally I had seen something, and it maybe because I had followed your journey over to Germany, and I followed Dr. Dome and somebody else, and something came up on my feed about how everything in your mouth is connected to your brain. And I'm like, I know this is not optimal right now. Yeah. And so what can I do to, kind of look under the hood and just have the balls to like whatever surgery or work that needs to get done, just get it done.
Yeah.
And so I've always gone to a traditional dentist. Being here in Austin, the friends that we have, biological dentistry is a very big thing. Yeah. My wife Peyton has recently started to see one for, she kind of has her own reasons for doing it. And so the timing of you coming on, me texting my buddies a couple of days ago, like, hey, where do I go?
Yeah.
And, 4 or 5 of the guys said the same place out here in Marble Falls. And so I'm so curious to learn more. And we talked a little bit about it before we started, but just more about your journey and, just, it could even be a 30,000 foot view of like, how it's different than traditional dentistry.
Yeah,
and why you were so called to it, and why, just like going into a medicine ceremony, they're not all the same. Not all shamans are the same. Some people just call themselves shaman.
Yeah.
And so it's probably not unlike organic.
Yeah.
It's very easy to get an organic label where, probably 1% of organic food is truly organic.
Yeah. Yeah. And the marketing of it all. And we talk about this with like grass fed is the same in some cases. But the thing with the impetus, I think, was really, and you're so familiar with this because I've been diving deep on the podcast and your backstory because I knew I was going to come and sit here with you and wanted to get to know you better. But the impetus is like, in life, we have these things that show up and then maybe we're like sort of tucking them away, or we're like, they're just like, they're over there. And maybe we're not going to look at them, but then there's this piece or component of my work, that my peak expression in the world is to work in the breathwork and the cold exposure space. And I also have my beginner sauna master certification, which is very exciting, but to work in this like resiliency recovery practices. And it's not lost on me that probably I am a person who needed that more than anyone else and continue to have to do that work because I lived in such a high stim, alpha energy, corporate background, yada, yada. And so my nervous system has always been in a quite a heightened state. And it's not always a bad thing. It's like adventurous, exciting, out, go-getter, all of that. But knowing how my nervous system felt, and then this little like hidden gem of like, well, 5 years ago, I had this surgery, but there wasn't a lot of aftercare. I was like not really heavily involved with any romantic partner at the time. So I felt super alone, like going through dental surgery and coming home and having it go haywire. And just by haywire, it's like, I don't want to throw any dentists under the bus, but the reality is just because you're using ceramic materials and it doesn't mean you really should be calling yourself maybe a biological dentist. I think there's an art form to it. And for me, it was really about like, my nervous system is so dysregulated out of this. Like I've gone to cleanings at dentists where like dentists have had to sort of snap at me, or like, I want to say yell at me, but just because I'm so dysregulated, I'm like already in teary-eyed and I've just shown up to the office, or this is not something uncommon for dentists, by the way. And also, how do we care for that person and hold space for that in a way that makes the person feel seen and heard, and in the way that helps hopefully course correct how a body can feel. And to me, all of that is about how your nervous system as a dental practitioner and my nervous system are doing a dance. I talk all the time in SHERPA Breath and Cold. I'm leading these instructor certifications, and I talk all the time about our job in leadership when we're talking to people and training them and sending them through an experience of breath and cold. What we really are doing is we're DJing their nervous system. And that's a huge responsibility because we're tapping into someone and then we're saying, okay, how can I cultivate a space where you are deciding that you feel safe? And then you can process a bit more so that you're re-regulating yourself, your body, your brain, your being. And so here is the space where I could not regulate myself as someone who's doing that all the time for everyone else and knows every breathwork trick and every cold plunge trick and every biohack for that. And I'm like, I just can't get past this big chair in the chair trauma that I had, which for anyone who's listening, was like a 4-hour surgery 5 years ago, maybe a little more than that. Supposed to be a root canal. The dentist called it a hot tooth. They said, this happens on rare occasion. Your tooth splits in a number of pieces. We have to take it out piecemeal. But the Novocaine they were using was wearing off every 10 minutes. I could feel everything drilling. I mean, anyone who's listening is like, ugh. But all of that was going on in my system. And they were like, biological dentist, we're going to, use ceramics and we're going to play a singing bowl and that will just be like the be all and end all for it. And that just wasn't quite like, sure, they would bone graft, sure they would, but like, it just wasn't quite, it's not just about the tools and the techniques you're using. It's about the entire experience. And I think that's what people need to be looking for. And the other thing is, it's always going to come at a slightly higher ticket. It's always going to cost a little more. And in my mind, the way that your body is treated and the way that we know the body keeps score, right? This famous book everyone talks about. We need to be in a space where we're like, I'm investing in the long-term health of my body and the long-term processing of how I feel as a human. So to me, it's like you spend a little more and you find a way, right? You find a way to do it so that you can be cared for. Because it was like, that surgery was not the first negative dental experience I had, because we all get wound around the axle for dental. Like you even talking about it, you're like, I don't know.
Yeah.
But now I feel like after being in Tübingen in Germany with Dr. Dome and going through the experience, like, oh, this is a way that I can be cared for. And that's like crazy to think that someone who is feeling how I was feeling, coming through that. And yeah, and I just mentioned to you, like even his language, like every time he went to go do the next thing in my mouth, he said, I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to help heal you.
Oh gosh.
Every time.
Wow.
Right. And so there's like breath protocols we use, and there's language that's correct. And there's like moments where you would have been fascinated, because I can tell by how your brain works, and like you want to take the computer apart and put it back together again. There is a fascinating sort of meta experience in the chair where he's telling you everything he's doing as he's doing it. So there's no big surprise or like what's going on or what's going to happen next, or, he's just telling you like, I'm going to cut the gum line open now. And you're like, okay, and of course, if you're a patient that's like, I don't want to know anything, he absolutely wouldn't do that. But I was like, walk me through this so I'm not in the dark. Half the reason I'm scared is I'm in the dark about what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's fascinating, because on some level it feels like, like, oh, I don't want to know that you're cutting the gum line. But at the same time, the not knowing is potentially, arguably more terrifying, because it's like, am I going to feel a shock in my tooth? Or it's like, okay. And I'm guessing from everything you've said now and before we even started that he did it in such a way that it's like, look, you're safe. This is just what I'm doing. In other words, I do this all the time. And
here's the sensation that's about to arise. He's like, at one point he said, I've hit there's a little scar tissue. So I know you're fully numbed, but there's going to be a moment where you're just going to feel like a pain arise very quickly. It might feel acute. And I want to tell you, by the time you feel the pain, it's already gone.
Oh, gosh.
This is the language, right? And it's not the 30,000 foot view. This is really like a 10,000 foot view, but this is not just about dental work, going in a chair, punching out. Like I told you about the guy who had to extract my one tooth because I couldn't wait for that. Like 50 people a day in and out, wheeling me in the wheelchair at the end of this little extraction that I was under for. I'm in the parking lot. I don't know how I got there. You know what I mean? It's not about that. It's about paying a little more and having someone who's adept and appropriately certified, and then going through the process of being fed nutritional protein shakes a couple of days before, IB drips, hyperbaric, going through the process of the surgery, completely shifting the trauma out of my system in a way that was like, okay, I understand. Am I gonna be like, I want to just for fun go have some dental surgery? No, but also I don't feel like I'll ever view it again the same way, as long as I have 2 more trips to have him finish my crown work and stuff. But all of that, and it's a beautiful understanding. What I took as well to come home as I'm training other coaches and working with people, it's an understanding of the language that we use matters, especially when people are feeling in duress. And it's a big understanding about what are the stories you're telling yourself. Even as he's like cutting into my gums, I'm imagining like, black fungus, it's all in our head. It's really not probably as bad or as crazy as we've made it out to be. It's just that we don't know what we don't know. So we design this thing that's like the story.
Prepare ourselves for the worst. So we imagine the worst.
Yeah, and don't we do this everywhere?
Get ourselves hyped up. Yeah.
We do this in life.
We really do.
We do this in life. We're future casting, we're imagining, we're building big anxieties around all the reasons that, I didn't get a chance to get back to this person for a few days because I was in dental surgery, and that person is sitting at home being like, oh, Kristin's pissed and she's like not going to put me on her podcast anymore because we've just made it up.
I'm coming through a bit of a cycle of that, and I feel like I'm in a good place with just allowing things to be as they are.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're in the throes of that future casting and it is all anxiety and everything that can go wrong is going wrong, it is hard to do much else. It's very kind of paralyzing. And for me, I definitely you get closed off, right? Because there's for me, just hiding whatever I'm feeling, because I don't want it to leak into my relationship with my wife. I certainly don't want my kids to feel any of it. And right or wrong, that's just how how I've in some ways been programmed to deal with those things.
Yeah.
Right. This whole self-reliance and never let them see you sweat. And you're this particular role in the family. And so you're the rock and whatever. And I know that's kind of, it always comes back to that for me. That's my work is knowing that that's a part of what I do. It's not necessarily who I need to be identifying with. But it is very interesting when I hear you talk about this experience, this beautiful experience. It's very reminiscent of someone I just had on the podcast, will have been released before this, Dr. Cameron Chestnut. And he is a facial plastic surgeon, minimally invasive, hyperbaric chamber, light therapy, IV, like whatever can be done to get the body prepared for surgery. A lot of times he's undoing. I think he said 65 to 70% of the work he does is fixing someone else's
mistakes,
fuck up. And he also takes the approach of one per day. And I believe he says he only does them on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, potentially Tuesday, but he doesn't even fill his whole week up. And so then he kind of programs the rest of his life around, like, he knows that on Saturday and Sunday, his workouts, he can be a little more intense because he doesn't have to be fully on and
Monday or something. Yeah.
He does journaling in the morning. He gets into the hyperbaric chamber himself on surgery days. To get himself prepared. And he's like, look, he goes, there are so many like amazing plastic surgeons. They're just in a tough system and they don't get to meet with the client beforehand, where he meets with them 30, 60, 90 minutes prior to surgery so that they're on the same page and they're jiving with what the plan is.
Yeah.
Much like I think you're
right?
Yes.
Connected on it. Yeah.
And you can tell by just who he is that's what he's meant to bring to the world. So it's really cool to hear you speak about your experience. And it's very similar in that way, where there's an old model. Yeah. And it worked for a long time. And then
it got people out of like tooth pain.
Yes. And there's a small group of people, doctors, who are trying a different path. And I can imagine it's very threatening in some ways to the establishment. And as we were talking about earlier, it's there's not a lot of belief in it, not necessarily because it's not actually happening as they say it is, but more of like, it's a real threat to how maybe you've practiced for 10, 15, 30, 40 years.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. But also there's like people in the dental industry. I told you that people wrote me a bit on DM, which is so interesting when it's like, dentists don't really write me. Yeah. And they're like, connect me with this guy. What's the story? Because they don't even know it exactly exists, or they have a partnership, a couple that's running a dental practice. The woman was like, I'm just so complacent. I'm like I don't even love to do this work anymore. I don't feel like it's like, am I helping people sort through what is their greater health, or like, like just feeling like I'd rather work the administration and the billing than go and do the work, because I want to be fully in with someone. If I'm not fully in and feeling fully present, I'm going to let my husband do the work. Yeah. Right. So it's like, it's like this market disruption. I mean, my background so much of in marketing in many ways. It's like, how do we embrace some of the market disruption that's going on and know that like one thing is inevitable, just change. Like how do we stay in that space where it's like, yeah, and even Dr. Dome is like, if someone calls me and says, this is a crap way to do that, you should try this thing. He's like, oh, cool. Like, tell me more about that. Right. Like, he's curious. I think that's what it comes down to. He's been doing this for it's been talked about cavitations and some of the things he's doing for 20 years. And he's been doing this for, as long, and faced a lot of fires from the universities and stuff and interviews did. And
it's not taught.
It's not taught. And people were like, oh, you're trying to dismantle all traditional dentistry, like fuck off.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
you're a witch doctor. None of this is real, you know? And then
Right.
to feel like, okay, all of my university professors are like ammoing against me.
Well, it in some ways, out here, it's easy to be curious about things, right? I could be curious about a lot of things. There's not necessarily much at stake for me. For him, there's a lot at stake, and to like the courage to actually be curious and to question. And then again, it's something I try to do as much as I can, is have my own experience with something. And then I know about it. I know it. And I think that's what he did. There's something whatever. I don't know his story, but he decided that what he was doing wasn't working and got curious. And in that, it challenges so many belief systems that are, a lot of like we all have. We're indoctrinated into these systems, whether through school, mentorship, media, whatever it is. We don't have our own experience. We haven't tried traditional versus biological and see which one makes more sense for us. We've just done the one and said the other one is witchcraft. And, how does that work? That doesn't make any sense. Like, this is not broken. Yeah. It's like, yeah, motherfucker, it's way broken, and.
Yeah, but this is like so in line with what The Great Unlearned is about, right? You talked about on a podcast or in one of your opening, I think I was listening to your like opening primer.
Oh, damn.
You were talking about like Ferangre saying, like, we have these agreements that we've set up, and it's not anybody's fault. It's like my mom took me to the dentist religiously when I was young, and I learned about the dentist a certain way, and that's what I thought, and she thought, and that's what society thought, and that's the agreement I made. And then the landscape opens whenever it does, right? Like appears when you're ready, or shows up and you're like, okay, shit, this isn't what I thought. And now you have a decision to make.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it takes courage to step into that, because it goes against everything you thought was true. Mm-hmm. Generally, it's a few things you thought were true. And then as you really walk in, you're like, so much of what I thought was true is actually not the case. Maybe true for some people, but for me, it's not true. And it's like, what else isn't true? And then it's like, it's almost like in the beginning, it's kind of cool. Like, oh, wow, that's interesting. And then it becomes this whole kind of swath of your life feels like it's untrue. And then that becomes a bit terrifying. And then that's what I believe they talk about the dark night of the soul.
Is that the existential crisis moment?
Yeah. It's like, well, who the fuck am I if none of is my life a lie? Does any of it make sense? Like, was I playing the wrong game? It's all those things. It's like, no, it's like you did all the things you had to do to wake up in this moment to see like there's a different way. Yeah. And it's hard sometimes because that old way was very comfortable.
Yeah. Yeah. And imagine for me too, when I walked into the office, again, it's like thinking about breath, thinking about nervous system tone, thinking about how everybody's working. It was fascinating for me to be around the office for a few days to see let's just call it behaviors. There's not a better word. I sort of don't love that word, but the behaviors of the staff in the office, like having concern or navigating their own stresses or how they are in the lunchroom. Because again, I told you I saw a little bit behind the scenes as I was like filming a lot of content around this education and this understanding. But tapping into people's nervous system and being like, there's a really interesting disconnect when you don't speak the native language. And I went in and held like a big breathwork session for his staff. And the number one piece of feedback they gave me before I went in was everybody's colleagues, nobody really wants to go there. So how deep are we going?
Oh.
And so the reality was like, I'm not going to take people to a place they feel unsafe with their colleagues and connection. And so I was very much like, hey, let's make this like relaxation and chill out and like talk a lot about the thing that's not happening in that office, which is these people are wearing masks all day. How do they breathe well? And they're dealing with patients with the utmost care and love, and also patients who are like in fear and challenged or scared. And that's resonating back and forth on both the nervous systems of the people who are there and the people who are in the staff, in the staff and the people who are in there to get the procedures. So how can they start to navigate that better, right? And it's like an interesting thing to come in as an English speaker in a German country where they do speak some English, and to try to explain like, there's a gas exchange in the body that people aren't talking about. And how can I do this in a way that's at least basic enough language that it's actually can be grokked by a staff that's dealing with people who breath work would be a big deal to calm their state. And then how am I walking the walk? That was interesting for me, right? Because I was like, I don't want to just like breathe through my nose and calm down. And I like feel like I'm really freaking out here. And like, I just need to have a moment to like have my little tantrum or, whatever. That's all happening internally in my nervous system. And I'm like, fuck me. You're like, you trained almost 300 coaches. What are you doing? But it just doesn't, we're human. We're humaning. Yeah. So it was really, it pit me up against, it's like, I'm certainly no expert in dentistry. It's like interesting to talk about this, but it's a great story that underpins like really being able to watch my nervous system tone, have the meta experience, see how the staff works, how that they are like doing the dance around how everybody's DJing each other's nervous system at all times, right? And how the Dr. Dome specifically is like so cool as a cucumber that you can have no other understanding that it's okay, right?
Yeah.
And that's like, now I'm going to get into a little bit of like your world maybe, but there is when I talk about, or you might, and I'm not putting words in your mouth, but when people talk about the navigation of balancing our masculine and feminine energies, it's where I have felt in my life and felt more recently that there's this imbalance is the ability for like quite definitively, Dr. Dome is a masculine man and also doesn't hold space like a bro at all, right? There's like a softness, there's a quality of openness, there's a listening aspect, there's a making my feminine feel like I could be a little in chaos, a little open, a little questioning, a little, free so that I could actually like settle in.
Oh yeah.
Right. And that's like really, again, it's like there's so many little mini meta studies throughout the course of the week. It's quite an emotional week for me, but to see that too is like, oh, I look to, and it's also, when I sat at the dinner table with all of you, all I do, I'm the weirdo who's like sitting on the plane next to someone. And I'm like, sometimes the people that I like work with or people in my mentorship are like, this is a little creepy, but it's not about being creepy. Like I'll sit next to someone on the plane and I will be like, okay, we're going to take off. I'm not a great flyer, but like whatever, we're going to take off. Let me see if I can like tap into, I'm certainly not staring at them or touching them, but like you're squeezing on the armrest and all the things. Can I kind of tap into their energy? Can I feel maybe their heartbeat, perhaps like in their arm or something? Or can I can feel and see peripherally their breath cadence. And then I'm like, how can I like align mine with theirs? And then I like play the game where I'm like, can I co-regulate them down?
Oh, wow.
And like it's really interesting because quite often people will actually break the fourth wall and be like, have a moment to be like, oh, where are you flying to? But it's like, I really believe it's coming from that like push on down regulation. Right. And so when I'm around people, when I sat at the dinner table where we all met for the first time, it was like a beautiful experience to sit in a circle of sort of this divine masculine, if you don't mind me saying so myself,
sure.
Where it really felt like people are like, you're navigating the experience of, every one of you having, all of us having feminine and masculine sides, but all navigating families and lives and work and trying to be curious and open, and also having moments where you're like, fuck, I got that wrong. What do I do now?
Yeah.
Did you get that wrong too? Who got it wrong first? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't want to be the first one to have got it wrong. I want to be the first one. So then I don't feel so bad.
Yeah.
But yeah, like it's like that, not to bring it into like the world of the woo, but I think that there's so much of that just pervades in everything and every way we show up every day.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love how there's an exchange with, you not just going there to have surgery and have that done, but you showing up for Dr. Dome and the staff and bringing your skills and your genius and your gifts. And then I'm so curious to see where that ends up, because that had to, just knowing what I know, I kind of understand what you're talking about. I got to believe they're a little, on the whole, a little less knowledgeable about that stuff. So I imagine because my mind was kind of blown when I was thinking about everybody is playing off one another. You've got the patient coming in whose nervous system is probably pretty jacked right then, because I would say almost zero people enjoy going into dental surgery.
Mm-hmm.
And so the staff is always dealing with that, always trying to manage it in a way that helps their nervous system, but they might not even know. I mean, there's so much of that is happening unconsciously that for them to have that awareness, there's probably a bit of a learning curve. It's like, oh no, there's a lot going on. So they become aware of like, there's a whole shit show going on here.
Yeah.
But that's the only way they can actually get to a place where they can be in some sort of resonance and co-regulate everyone down. I mean, that's so cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, were you able to see anything? I know you were there for 10 days. I'm not sure when you kind of had this conversation with them. Were you able to notice?
I had it before surgery. So it was cool because I could see unfolding after. And there was some in two modes. The first thing was I ran people through like 40 minutes of breath work and nothing that was too, by gnarly, I just mean upregulating mouth breathing, circular connected, like nothing that was going to have people like see, DMT experience, all the things that you see on YouTube. So people aren't having, what I like to call trauma porn when you see it on Instagram when people are like weeping and crying and throwing themselves around. And I also want to it's like, it's okay to have some of those experiences, of course, as long as you're not doing it every day, but have those experiences with prolific leaders in the breathwork space. And I have run journey spaces like that where that's the intention is to move some energy through, to process some trauma, et cetera. And I'm skilled in it. And I also find myself I feel like very trauma aware. And when people are going through that, when I go to a breathwork experience and I want to be able to sort of be open, quite often I'm asking people if I'll sign a waiver for safety, but I don't want to sign a photo release. And I've had other, I would say colleagues say, sorry, it's all in or nothing, right? And it's just like, because I try to really be respectful with not sharing, unless someone's really like, I'm a scream therapy coach and I want to show it on social. I try to not show these like private moments of people. And so I call that like trauma porn, but this is a sidebar. But what I got to see that week unfold was really interesting because I did a breathwork landscape, what I would say up to like a grade 3, which is like a flow style breath, but nothing more intense. And there were some tears, very masked, chill, like some people who had some like, you finish the end of a breathwork session, you feel parasympathetic, and then maybe you feel safe enough to emote. There wasn't a lot of that. One woman the next day came to me and was like, I went home and I cleaned my house for like 4 hours. I had so much energy. I felt amazing, And then people did talk to me about, I have to breathe through my nose more during the course of the week, like having those conversations. I had Dome and some of the staff, like just before we did my surgery, I was like, let's take a couple breaths together, like little things like that come up. And I think that this is like, it's the most low hanging fruit. And we're all breathing. People are like, I'm breathing, Kristin. I work with a whole slew of these professional dancers that are just absolutely incredible human beings. And yeah, in the beginning, they're always like, oh, Kristin's going to come in for a whole weekend while this choreography is going on and talk to us about breathing. Like we're breathing. They're not open-minded. They're just like, why is she here the whole weekend? Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And then it's like, because by the end of the weekend, they're like, oh, I can see the practical application is they'll be in the middle of choreo and I can see things going on that thankfully I'm working with this beautiful creative direction team of choreographers that will say, what's your input, Kristin? Right? That's like really a gift because that doesn't always happen. But people navigating, how they breathe, how it makes them feel, how it makes them perform, whether that be athletically or just in life or in the office for this whole staff at the dental office, right? And it's like starting to connect, like plug that in so that people don't keep those things unplugged.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this is a perfect example. I never know how I'm going to start the podcast. And when we met at dinner, this isn't what I would have guessed I would have started, but it's so perfect.
What would we have talked about? What did you think of dinner right away?
It just wouldn't have been this.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
And I would have written some things down and it wouldn't have been that either. It would have been, we were sat in the room and started talking about something and then that was it. Yeah. But I do want to shift into, like this work that you've been doing with the breathing and the cold. And one of the questions I was going to ask is, where does the heat come in the sauna? Mm-hmm. So you get to talk about that. So I'm stoked to hear about that.
Yeah.
But where did this journey start for you, if you could really pinpoint it?
I mean, the long story that I'll make short is that like I was always really curious around nutrition and health. Like I was the weird 18-year-old kid and into 19, like just before I went into college where I owned a juicer. Now like we're going back, 20 years plus.
Gotcha.
So
Yeah.
juicer,
Yeah.
weird kid.
Yeah.
And I was reading books, but this has sort of since been, dismissed, but reading books about food combining, like and the way you put proteins and starches and things so you can digest more easily and quickly and all these things. But I was like doing that in my like late teens and sort of like, yeah, I was a theater major. I went to performing arts high school. Like I had
Where did you grow up?
Long Island.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Detected some New York in there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So I had a lot of those like interesting quirks, creative quirks.
Were your parents any kind of influence with that stuff or was it really just...
My parents were like not athletic, my dad was into music and my mom was a school teacher and not athletic really, military brat on my mom's side, like just really nothing. I don't know why I got so curious about all those things, except for the fact that I was dancing since I was 5. And I was like, I love food. And all these bitches are starving themselves out, these ballerinas.
Oh,
like, I mean, bitches with love. It just, I was like, all these women are just like starving themselves out. It was like kind of the thing to do when you were a ballerina back then. And I was like, I want to be a prima ballerina. And my big question to myself was like, how can I eat whatever I want and still like keep the figure I need to be a dancer? That was like the thing I think that spurred it all on at a very young age, like 10, being like, but I want to eat, but no one else is eating. But why is everyone starving themselves out? This doesn't feel healthy.
Yeah.
So that was like sparked the whole thing. But then I went out into the world of health and I worked in big corporate businesses for like luxury brands. And I always was the person leaving the office at 5, 6 o'clock at night, going to fitness or training or a certification course. And all my counterparts, because I worked in beverage, would be like drinking or partying or going to the bar, being like, oh, where are you off to? You're going to go get your sweat on? Like making fun of me.
Yeah.
And it just didn't pay the bills. And I loved it. And sort of probably that was for the best because I loved it. Right. And it was like not about the money. I did the job for the money and I loved the job too. But so I really got into nutrition. And then one day I finally just said, what's my legacy? Do I want to be like, I launched Red Bull in the United States with a whole team of people. I made more people drink Sailor Jerry rum than anyone could imagine. Like, what's my legacy?
Yeah.
And so I left. And in the midst of like the very potential possibility for a very big promotion, I just said, it's now or never. And I left. I opened a fitness studio. That's lucrative. And,
I thought about that journey when we moved from Chicago to here. I'm like, this is what I'm meant to do. I'm meant to train, coach, do all that. And then as I just started to open up that box, it's like, wait a minute. I just had a pretty successful career as a trader, afforded myself some luxury of time. And now I'm going to go into a business that is extremely hard to make any money in. And I'm going to work a ton of hours.
Totally. So it was a shift. It was like, it was a crazy shift. And then there was a big moment in my life in my coaching career where my father passed away, which was really hard for me to navigate. And 2 months later, although he always says, tell people it's 3 because I sound like an asshole. But my ex and I have 11 years split. So it was like all within like a 60-day window. Wow. And that was like the 2 most important men in my life were instantly gone. And I was living between New Hampshire and New York. I was like going down to see my dad where he was sick. And then I moved to California. I just packed everything like it was my job, like a logistics event planner queen. And then I was like, I'll fall apart when I get there. I'll let myself fall apart when I get there. And that's sort of exactly what I did. And I moved to California and I made a really distinctive decision that I wanted to coach people more deeply in the health landscape. And that I knew I had 2 decisions from my past life, which was like, I can just be in this apartment. I'd cut my work schedule down to like halftime so I could kind of mourn and do whatever, take care of myself, supposedly. But I was like, what's the big decision? And I like had a come to Jesus talk with myself in the mirror. It was like, you can just go out to the bar and go become like LA party girl, or you can go to the gym. Because I knew that I would feel better just from working out. And I can't tell you how many like sessions I had training at gyms and with trainers and whatever, where I was just like on the rower in tears again or like whatever. Yeah. But I'm so glad that I made that decision. And I was probably maladaptively training like 7 spin classes a week, but it was like, I was working to heal myself and figure out what was going on and also like get out some of that angst and trauma and sadness. And so from that point on, I was like hell yeah, I'm all in on this coaching thing. And I just started coaching people, mainly women in the beginning.
How long ago was this? Did you move to California?
8-9 years ago now.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And I started coaching women. And in that container, I was weaving in 7 years ago. I went to Laird and Gabby's house.
Yeah.
And I was like, XPT, what's this thing? Oh, this weekend. Oh, they're going to.
When did they start that? Was it much before then?
No, it was the early first year that they kicked it off. So it was like 7 years ago, maybe a little more. And I was like, what's the story? Like they're throwing me around in the sand. What I loved is that it was like me and a whole slew of like surfers and pro athletes and maybe like 1 or 2 other pedestrians. And I was like, talk about a little imposter syndrome.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
I mean, it's like, I'll put you there and you'll still even feel like, this is a lot.
I bet.
And so at Laird and Gabby's, I felt super welcome in some ways and really a little bit of like an outsider, but then my own shit, right? My own baggage. And then we were doing all this training. It was like weights in the pool and Patrick McEwen was there and like who's Oxygen Advantage guy. And I was like, I have 100 questions for him. And not knowing he was an introvert, I forced him to sit with me at lunch and was like, Patrick, opened my notebook and was like, question number 1. And he was like, I could just feel the energy that he was like, oh my God. He's such a shout out to him. He's such a sweet friend and mentor and great man. But Laird was like a 14-year-old boy. Like I'm covered in sand and schwitz and shit from like the beach workouts. And he's like coconut, like, it's meant to be an experience. It's a very fancy experience, but it was like cold and then weights in the pool and sauna and all this shit's going on. And the big catalyst for me now, remember, I'm like coaching a bunch of women and in the health space around nutrition, around fitness. I have a really good background in that and certifications and all the nonsense. And then I go to Laird's and I'm like, oh, this is what athletes are training like. And I'm not like world's greatest swimmer. Mm-hmm. And now you're going to have me take 40-pound dumbbells to the bottom of a 12-foot pool. And I was like, all right, this feels like a lot. So the whole first half of it, the first half day, it's all these like, these surfing guys are like underwater getting rolled for like 5 minutes. They're like learn how to hold their breath over time. They're well practiced. They're like crossing the bottom of the pool, just chilling with these big weights on one breath. I'm like, what is this? I'm the weakest link. Like anyone who's watching this unfold is like,
I would have been weaker than you
I'm the
to make you feel
link.
better, even though I wasn't there.
You think so?
Yeah, I'm terrible swimmer and I panic a little bit underwater. So holding my breath would have been a disaster.
It was just like
12 feet down. Yeah. With dumbbells.
Wild. Yeah. And I was like, okay. So I like try to cross the bottom of the pool. I barely make it on one length across the pool. I come up, I think to myself, thank God it's water because I'm crying and no one can tell. Except for like Gabby's like at the other end of the pool. She's like, hey, what's going on? And I was like, thank God it's water. And she's like, it's okay. Like more air, less effort. Really beautiful. I use that phrase so much because there's so many things in life that's correlates to. Like take in as much air as you can, but less effort. Like what's the minimum effective dose of effort you can use to carry that weight? Because every additional piece of effort is burning oxygen.
Oh, wow.
Right? So just like really beautifully refined.
Oof. Yeah.
And then at the end of that half day, when I've like cried in the pool and been like, I suck, everyone else is better than me. And all these big, strong surfer dudes are like trying to be nice to me, but they're all like, this girl's dragging us down. And I know that like the next big things that are going to happen are going to be that we have ice baths and we have sauna. And I'm like, after lunch, like, or I just set myself, it's the best lesson one of the best lessons I've ever given myself that I've really grokked. And I share this all the time with people I work with, which is like, you can see it in the CrossFit games when the person is 10 foot away from the bar. You could feel it in the way that I decided how I was going to go into cold exposure at Laird and Gabby's. It's like, it's the approach. You already know if the lift is going to go well by watching the approach. Yeah. You already know how you've set yourself up for success or not by the way you walk in the door to the thing that you're doing. And it's not all the battle, but it's the most of it, right? It's like mindset, it's physicality, it's prowess, it's all of that stuff that you have to show up for yourself because ain't no one else going to show up for you in those moments. So you really have to show up for yourself. So I was like, I'm decided that I am going to not only get in the cold first, which is like, I'm going in first. I don't give a shit. I am going to crush the soul. Like I have a competitive side. Okay. I was like, I'm going to crush the souls of all these big boys who are in the pool with these fucking weights, walking back and forth and showing me up. my job will be, we were only allowed to do 3 minutes at that point. I was like, I'm going in, I'm head dunking on the in, I'm head dunking on the out. I'm going to cross my arms in the way that they told us to. I'm going to do 3 minutes and I'm going to do it like a Zen Buddhist. Because what I want is for all of these guys to see that I have an area that I can pull my weight.
Fuck.
And so it was like this really distinctive decision that when we got to the ice tubs after lunch, that PJ or Mark, I think was manning my tub. This guy, Mark, he's like, I didn't even have to say anything. He was like, I feel like Kristin's going to go first. Cause I was like, anticipating hovering like in the face of, in his face while we're setting up. And so I was like, great. And I did exactly. I mean, I would say there was 1% of me that's surprised because you just don't know when you set yourself up what's actually going to happen.
This is a new experience.
And I was like, I got in the ice bath. I dunked on the way in. I came up. I remember the exact bathing suit thing I was wearing. I came up. I like settled myself in, put a smile on my face, and watched every one of those guys have the same thought. There were like 2 other women there and like the defense of the women as well. But everyone else who was there, just like one at a time, the thought bubble, I just watched it cross all their minds like, oh shit, she just did that so well. I have to do it at least that good. Like I just could tell because it was like, and I felt like, and it helped me be even more successful, right? Settle in. I was like, how can I totally relax my body? How can I make this seem like make it up like it's so easy? And it was the only time I ever really navigated a decent amount of like that shock response you get in the beginning. And then ever since that day, I really don't have that so much. I don't ever feel like, oh, this sucks. And I had done cold exposure since I was like young in these little like here and there in like Turkish saunas or a Korean bathhouse or something. But like I would go in for 30 seconds and be like, wah! And then like not know how to manage stress or resiliency or use my breath or anything. But I had never done an experience that was like that. And then I was like hooked. I as soon as I got out of the tub, we had done some breath work and stuff during the day, and I'd met with Patrick, and the weekend was so filled with like beautiful understanding that I went and I just like tugged on all the coaches' shirt tails and Gabby and Laird, and then said, I'm going to coach this. I'm going to coach this. When's your next coaching experience? They're like, it's in 4 days. It's the last one for this year. And I was like, no, I'm doing it. They're like, it's full. I was like, it doesn't matter. I'm coming.
Really?
They're like, but no, it's like it's 18 hours of pre-work. You have to like watch all these videos. And I was like, I'll do it. I don't care. It's 4 days. I can do it. And I just nagged them basically till the next day when they said, okay, fine, we'll make a space. And then like the rest for me was like history because I started weaving cold and breath into all the women's work. And I watched it. I will just say this. I biohacked a lot. I've done a lot of things in fitness and wellness in that space. I've seen a lot of people who can adhere well, athletes, and a lot of people who don't adhere well. People were like, but I paid you all this money. Why am I not getting fit?
Yes.
It's like, do the fucking work.
Yes.
It's like, no offense, I love you. I understand why there's resistance. How can we do this work better together? I can't do it for you. And so I instantaneously started seeing women adhere better that were like not athletes. I instantaneously started seeing people's mood shifts, seeing people drop stress off, like just from the breath and cold. So for me, out of all the modalities I've ever worked with, there are no 2 modalities that are as transformative as putting breathwork and cold exposure together to create transformative, rapid change. Doesn't mean that lifting weights isn't important. Doesn't mean red light therapy or all the other shit we do isn't important. But you need a gateway to adhering to becoming the greatest version of yourself. And to me, that's the gateway. Is figuring out your breath cadence, how you utilize it, and then cold just being that big snap that gets people to go, holy shit, I can do hard things.
That's what probably the thing I love most about the cold is showing up for that. Now, every time I get in, I have that like fuck.
Shock response.
Yeah.
Which is normal.
Yeah.
So normal. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. And there's a part of me that likes it. I think there's so many questions for you. So many. One has to do with women in cold versus men. I don't incorporate any breath work into my cold, so I really want to understand just on a surface level. We can talk about it more if you'd like. Your thoughts on cold after training. I know that there have been studies that say it stunts hypertrophy and yada, yada, yada. So curious about that. And if it does, to what degree? 50%? Is it 5%? Is it, for someone like me, does it really fucking matter? Or yeah, you're doing the work, you might as well wait. I think I've heard 6 to 8 hours. It's like, not really as convenient, but okay. So let's start there. Let's start with women in particular. Because you are a woman and you've worked with a ton of women.
Yeah. And
I've had this conversation with my wife. She doesn't love getting in, and she's seen some things that say it's not there. It can be more detrimental in some ways for women, and it could be based on where they are in their cycle. It could be where they are in life, premenopausal, postmenopausal, in kind of all these things. Like, what's like I'll let you just unpack
the broad
that
stroke.
Yeah, in any way you'd like.
Literally the BROAD, broad stroke.
We can still say that on this podcast.
Are you allowed to say broad? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm a feminist, but I like that term. I don't know. My grandma used to always say, go get all dolled up. And I was like, oh, I like to get dolled up. It makes me feel, so yeah, let's not get canceled. But but the thing with women, I tend to be a bit more conservative with females in how I advise them to do cold. And it's for a number of reasons. Predominant one is really about like hormonal dysregulation. Like, where do you sit in your hormone profile? Is it very regular? Is it like even? Are you getting tested regularly? Do you know what's going on? And also, women we see male hormone cycles, 24-hour hormone cycle, and the way your testosterone rises in the morning and all the things that you can tolerate a bit better. The daily ice plunge thing, right? The like day 642 of an ice bath. Like shout out to Jordan Ferrone, who's like amazing. And it's like day 642, all this crew doing this. And I think there's a risk aversion too, right? That kind of comes with female genetics. Again, people will be like, prove it. But there is a risk aversion, right? We're like taking care of communities and the babies and whatever. And we're maybe not out being like the exact, like the hunter right away, because we want to make sure people are protected and everyone's included and things are safe. So some of that. But the reality is, like, as a woman, if you're doing an ice plunge, I just had this conversation with my friend Molly this morning. If you're doing an ice plunge 3 times a week, let's say 40 degrees Fahrenheit, 3 minutes, something like that, or building up a tolerance, why would, if 7 times, we don't know this from the research, if 7 times a week every day is going to be harmful to you, why would you just like not err on the side of caution? And 3 times a week is going to get the job done. From a metabolism standpoint, from like so many other standpoints, it's going to feel great. And maybe you're also the person that's like, but I need it every day because it makes my mood shift. Like, then great, then I'm all in. A study just came out like 2 days ago. Perimenopausal and menopausal women wild swimming, and across the board, it's a subjective test sort of, where they ask questions and whatnot. But across the board, 100% the women are like mood boosting, all in, like totally quelling my anxiety, all in. So why would we not apply the tools when we need them, depending on the time of life and the things going on in our lives? And that builds back to the big thing, which is male or female, or however you represent. When we look at the physiology, context is king. I say this all the time in the training. Context is king and safety is queen. This is like life, right? It's like everybody's going to be bio-individual. But females, I'm a bit more conservative. And I've interviewed all the people. There's a huge faction of TCM, traditional Chinese medicine, that's like, women in cold womb, no, don't do it. Mm-hmm. It's not that that's been debunked. I've had the conversations on my podcast with a traditional Chinese medicine doc and practitioner. And it's like, cool, there's ways that full systemic cold therapy can support the system. Let's not just write it off, right? Mm-hmm. And everyone gets to do what they want with their body. In my eyes, like, I'm not going to tell you what to do. I can only suggest, right? I'm not a medical doctor. I'm not your doctor. But so traditional Chinese medicine can be like, no. And there's all this discourse online where people will just like yell at me on a post or something about it's not good for women. I've interviewed Dr. Stacy Sims, who's prolific triathlete coach. She trains her women predominantly when they do cold in cold water swims or tubs at 55 degrees. And the interesting thing there is we all have a little bit of a bias, and even if we're researchers, because for Dr. Stacy Sims, the women that she's training, she's actually putting in 55-degree water because it helps them and their bodies practice not over-responding to mammalian dive reflex at that temp, because what temperature are they probably swimming their triathlon swims at is around the same. Mm-hmm. And what do we not want to have happen when we're racing to win the water? The open water, we don't want our body to naturally like slow its heart rate and calm itself down, which is a natural physiological response that's helping us be saved if we're drowning, but not if we're in a race. So how do we mitigate that so we can keep the heart rate paced enough so that I can have a good time in the water in that swim? So it makes sense why she would be putting women in there. And like she gets a lot of heat for being like the don't put women in colder thing. It's like contextually, she's trying to err on the side of caution and target the context of the women she might be working with most often. Yeah. So I love, this is what's so fascinating about what I try to do with SHERPA Breath and Cold is it's not a method. It's not the do it my way or the highway. I've created a framework where I can talk about breath and cold for different bodies and different contexts so that nobody feels uncomfortable to talk about the one situation or the one thing, the one piece of context. So for women, it's like 3 times a week, great. Like if you're getting there, if you have a cold plunge at home and you want to do it a little more, great. If you're just like a cold shower gal, that's fine. Although we do see in the research that the long-term benefits of cellular health and, shifting long-term metabolism and all the things that go on with brown adipose tissue, which people in many ways focus too much on. Mm-hmm. We see those things by doing frequent full cold water immersion, right? So that's like for anybody. So that's a lot of nerdiness, but that's like, I want women to have permission. And some women will show up and say, I have my period. I don't think it's a good idea. And it's like, well, use your intuition first. But then there's so much science on interesting parts of cold, but it's all over the place. Different time, different temperature, no protocol. It's just your left arm. It's your whole body. It's your head under. It's, 14, 19-year-old men in college. It's 50 menopausal women. It's all over the map. Yeah. So there's like, I've said this more and more. I'm starting to say this, and I will lean into this hard in 2025. So if anyone's not into this, unfollow me now.
Get ahead of it.
I love the science. I'm born and bred on reading the research and pulling shit from my site account. And I'm in the midst of working with a cold company to do more research. There isn't really any good research on clinically diagnosed PTSD and cold affecting mood and anxiety. So I'm working on that, trying to get that pushed through with them and developing protocols, all this exciting stuff. And I actually don't care. Like at the end of the day, I've put over 4,000 people one-on-one in cold, and the changes that I see in their lives, in their choices, in their ability to understand their greatness, and the changes that I see in my own personal well-being, especially when it comes to navigating depression, anxiety, and loneliness. I don't really care if there's science or not. And if you're anti-cold, then don't go in cold. But maybe, just maybe, leave yourself open to the fact that it could change how you feel. And like, isn't that the biggest pandemic right now that we're actually dealing with, is people being anxious AF and depressed in many ways, or feeling alone, like very separate. And when you go in cold plunge with a group of people, I don't have to tell you, it's like a catalyst for like a little joy and connection and oxytocin. And I see this with the swim athletes I work with. 19-year-old, 20-year-old college women's swim team. Like, not that the men aren't interesting to work with, but you give, 3 claps up and a gold star to the men and they're like, yeah, they're all on the same page. It's so amazing to work with male athletes. It's like, wait a minute, you just bought into that? Very simple. 3 claps and a gold star and Tony's in? He just hated you and now he's in? Okay. It's almost beautiful, right? Yeah. It's like, okay. And then with women, there's a lot more to navigate there, a lot more emotionality, connection, disconnection, pitting one against the other, whatever's happening in our stories. And you start to put these women or anyone on the team, even if they're infighting about who should be the captain or whatever. And then you start to see that there's more, like, they're getting more congruent with each other. There's sort of the oxytocin and the bonding is actually working at a base human level, whether they want to see it or not. And they're more connected and they're more understanding and they're going through the stress of the cold together. And then you'll see that there'll be some shifts in the way that the infighting kind of eases off. So when we're with people and we're in cold and we're doing things like that, we get more joy, we get more connection, and so it's like, yeah, I love the research. And like, have you just watched a whole crew of people do ice plunges for the first time? It's like, You know, it's like I was on the Power Athlete podcast. I don't know if you know John Welburn, but like ex-NFL player and all the things.
One of the original CrossFit guys.
Like
too.
badass, CrossFit, the whole thing. And he's like, you know, if the hardest fucking thing that we're doing is like getting it in the cold and being like, yo, I did 3 minutes in the cold. Like we got another thing coming. We got a lot to learn. And I think that that's like year 6, I don't know what he's 6'5", huge football player who's been through it, every single stressor you can imagine.
Yeah.
And of course, for him, it's not a big deal.
Yeah.
But for the rest of society, many, many other people, it is a hard thing. And it is a way that we can get out of like the comfy, cozy couches that we like live on every single day. And so I love that he said that to me because I'm like, okay, I get it. If it's the hardest thing we're doing, we're wusses. But also, it's hard for a lot of people and it's a repeated challenge and it's a dedication to a consistent practice. And so like, yeah, you're badass for going in the cold. And just because John Welburn thinks like you could do better doesn't mean, you know, that you're not doing amazing things. So this just builds back to like, it's really to me about the mental, emotional baseline. Like, I don't know if you're listening to this podcast right now and you haven't done cold. There's just, unless you have a medical reason, you know, contraindication, heart issues, or high blood pressure that's like off unmanaged and things like that. It's life-changing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you learn a lot about yourself. And just I think in those spaces, you know, I've played around a lot. I'm sure you have, like listening to music that can be distracting and it makes it a little easier. So there's like almost a little disassociation with what's going on. And then going in with no music and no nothing and feeling everything that I meant to feel in that moment. And then see what comes into my consciousness when I'm not distracted by things that are trying to help me get through this experience. And kind of everything in between that. You know, I had a kind of a good stretch in the spring where I was going in every day. And, you know, it got to be where it wasn't necessarily that challenging. You're right.
So
and I totally adapted. And a friend asked me, he's like, what do you think about like kind of mixing it up so that when you go in, it's actually more challenging again? And I was like, oh, that's so interesting. I hadn't considered. I mean, there's almost like this threading the needle where you get to that adaptation. So you've put enough time in and consistency and shown up where you kind of thread that needle and then you step away, which is really hard for men because we want to accomplish. And if we get to that state where this is easy, we did the thing, and then it's like undoing it.
Yeah.
And then starting over again in some capacity is very kind of counter to how we are programmed. And I think it's a great practice for us. You know, I just had a friend on the podcast last week and we talked about this idea of if we're going to run, let's just say a marathon, and you've been training so hard for it and you're about to break your PR and you get to the finish line and you don't cross and you just leave it at that.
Like 10 feet away.
Yeah.
You're like, nope.
Like, does it change what you did?
No, and it's Spanisbogen, right? We talk about Dune. It's like, it's the beautiful waiting for the outcome that's the joy, right? That's like, we say the joy is the journey, but it's like the anticipation of the outcome. That's like where we live when it's done. We know this from Huberman, you know, our Lord Huberman.
Yeah.
When we're done the deed, the dopamine hit's gone. Yeah. We're like, where do we go next? Okay, I'm not getting the hit. And the hit happens on the way there, right?
Yeah.
Or like it may be instantaneously in the moment you cross the finish line and then it's like, oh, okay.
It's like your team wins the World Series and it's like the ride's over.
Yeah.
It's like, this is awesome. Oh, they won. Fuck, it's over. Like, I wish it went on longer. And so there's, you know, how many of the things for me, it called into question, like how many things am I doing for that kind of almost, it's not, I guess it's somewhat arbitrary, but this sense of accomplishment, because arguably the accomplishment was showing up every day to prepare for that race. It wasn't in the 3 hours and 15 minutes it took to run the race, but it becomes about it can be about that particular outcome. And, I just think about where in my life I'm so focused on an outcome versus appreciating and surrendering to what is unfolding in these different kind of little vignettes of my life.
Yeah.
And so it was like super curious. Like, I don't know if I could. I could stop before the finish line. It would be like a great lesson, a much greater lesson than like starting over the cold plunge.
Yeah. Someone just posted like, Instagram is what it is, but someone was posting like, it's like an older gentleman, like probably in his 80s, white hair at the end of a marathon like that. And then like doing this whole little like 30-second like dance where like as you're watching, you're like, cross the line already. But he's like, like 5 feet from the thing. And he's just like, 1 foot forward, 1 foot back, 1 foot, and you're like, cross it already. You just want him to, but then you're like, oh, that's not the point. The point is he's extending the time of the deliciousness of the whole process to be like, okay, I'm going to cross the line. So I feel like that's a thing. And when people, there's also so many beautiful ways to like cross the line, or like when I think about cold specifically, or like we really should talk about breath because they're hand in glove, but the cold piece is like, we can titrate the dose of stress in so many different ways. I just had a mentorship group where one of the women had them all bring a new ice protocol that isn't in my portal and something they developed, or she's like neural ninja is what she called it. And it's like making like peace symbols and okay symbols while you're in the cold. So you're like navigating brain training while you're in the cold. You can do in and outs. You can do head dunks and hold unders. You can do so many different things. And especially when I look at like the CrossFit population who gets in, like the biggest challenge in the cold for that set, I'm generalizing wildly, but what I see is that there's like any big strong dude can muscle through 3 minutes. Mm-hmm. But what does it feel like to have absolute surrender to that moment and really like not muscle through and white knuckle it? Like how could there be a lesson in that, right? And sometimes I'm blessed with the gift of being like a female perhaps in my energy, so that when I sit next to a tub, next to a big strong man, and I can speak sweetly to them, that there's an ability for me to say, what happens if you just like let it all go right now? And I could bear witness to that. It would be so special. Or something that I think perhaps a male energy might respond well to, versus you being like, come on, dude, 2 more minutes or whatever.
Absolutely.
So like that, there are so many ways to titrate that stress, or let's call it like enjoy the journey longer. Like whoever frames an ice bath like that, but that's the catalyst for change. And we can change it with time and temperature and so many different things. And even breath pattern. Like we can change how we're breathing to make it. If you had Jocko Willing standing over you, just like screaming military style in your face while you were taking your 3-minute plunge, it would be a hard plunge.
Totally. No, it's so true. And like when I've kind of coached people through it, just because we've got one at the house, take, I would say, a similar approach to you. And I've had people who have unwittingly come in with different energy of like rah, rah. And it's like, you're jacking up their nervous system right now. Like, let's get them to breathe and like, let them know that they're safe and everything's okay. And there's so much in our, intonation of our voice and just being with them. Yeah. And, again, it's usually the meatheads that are screaming. And it's funny because that's how they've gotten through a lot of their bench press. And there's something to be said for that. Yeah. There's a time where you need to jack the nervous system for something like that. But generally, in that space.
Especially with newbies, I think it's important. Like people who are newer to the cold, and especially with people who are used to muscling through things. Like I was just in On It a couple months ago. I was at On It. There's 3 tubs there. And I'm like in the far tub by the wall where I usually plunge. And I'm just chilling. I'm like putting up 6 minutes. People are always like, what's your plunge protocol? But like, I love like a 5-6 minute, 38 to 40 degree, like just, it's perfect. I don't need more. I'm like happy with it. I can do less, whatever. But I'm like having my calm, chill, like a moment that I really need just to calm my nervous system and like just reset my nervous system. And then there's like an 18 or 19-year-old kid and the one that's to my right. And then just on the other side of that, there's probably like a 30 or 40-year-old guy who's like obviously mentoring this kid, and they're very all MMA all day, right? They're all like Rogan MMA, whatever. And the kid is in there with his arms out up to his armpits. So for anyone who's listening who does cold plunges, I really prefer that you get all the way in up to your neck without hesitation or anticipation. Just get in, get up to your neck, get that heart rate, mammalian dive reflex, all the things happening. But the kid's up to his armpits and his arms are on the top of the thing. And he's like holding on for dear life. And he's kind of only staying in up to his nipples because his dude man is like, come on, like you got to get in. We're doing this is what big men do, or whatever.
Yeah.
And I'm in there and I'm like just in my meditative chill. And then there's this moment where the kid's getting even more nervous. And the guy, like my mom will love that I'm about to say this, but the older guy is like, come on, you pussy. And he's just yelling at this kid. And I'm in the other tub and I'm just thinking, this is like the irony of life. Like it takes all kinds. And it's not even to like slight the person who's doing that. Like, I don't know what kind of training they're in. I don't like teach their own. You want to, have your party, scream at your friends, get in the cold plunge. Like do it however you want.
Yeah.
But like that's kind of the last thing that kid needed in my opinion, right? It's just like this guy yelling. And I'm thinking how amazing it is that this other MMA older gentleman doesn't care that I'm in the other tub
At
just
all.
chilling. And it doesn't matter. It didn't matter to me. I just was like laughing at the irony of it. If I was like a new plunger, I might be like freaked out, but it was such this like beautiful mess of like everything going on in the cold room. And it's just
You're
like,
over there zen down
I'm like, so many protocols, so many protocols we can do. If someone came over and yelled at me, it probably would dose my stress up, or whatever. But what I want is for people to feel successful. What I want for that younger kid is to be like, oh, there's a purpose for this and I'll feel better tomorrow and I'll feel not re-traumatized and all of that. And that's what I want. And then the other piece to speak to is because you said people sometimes come in inadvertently hyped up or they're either nervous or they're like very Wim Hof style.
Mm-hmm.
And I love Wim. None of us would be talking about cold this much if it wasn't for like Wim and that whole, army of people doing it for years and years. And, Wim's method that he's known for is that like super ventilated, upregulating breaths before you get in. And it's all beautiful. And I think it works because it works because we are upregulating our nervous system before we go and do something that is upregulating. So the thought process is, well, it will be easier because you've already jacked your nervous system up before you get in the tub. So there is truth to that. Sympathetic nervous system tone. It's going to feel like I'm already jacked, so I'm getting in. And my big question, although I think it's like, look, do it any way you want. Sometimes I'm doing like Wim style shit, or I try all the different things in cold and before cold with breath. But my big thing is like, we don't know when like the shitty phone call is going to come or the divorce papers are going to get served or God forbid, delete, some tragic thing happens and you have to like bear witness to that. We don't know when those things are going to happen. So with that kind of a thought process, it's like, I'm not going to be like, oh, in 5 minutes, that kid over there is going to like get hit by a truck and I have to like resuscitate I'm going to do 30 rounds of breath and like hold my breath and I'll do another 30 rounds and like, I'll be ready. We don't have that.
Nice.
We don't get that. And so what I really try to get people to do in the beginning is, how can I downregulate my nervous system by long nasal exhales? How can I tap in and ground myself and be really present to this experience that's about to happen? And then throw myself into the storm of it, if that's how it feels to you, throw myself into a sympathetic charge. And then as quickly as I can, re-regulate so that I can practice getting good, not at taking ice baths, but I can practice getting good at the game of life. Because the shit's going to hit the fan and we won't know. And if we can use our breath to regulate, this is the whole reason most of us get in the cold, right? Yes, there's recovery. Yes, there's catecholamine response. Yes, there's so many beautiful things with mood and everything else. But the best reason that people get more stress tolerant and resilient is because they get in. And if they've navigated with like a slow, easy breath and they have one moment that's like the, or the fuck, or the whatever happens to people in cold. Yeah. And then they can like re-regulate down, longest nasal exhale of the day. Okay, I'm here, I'm present. Most people, you can't be anywhere else but in that moment in the ice bath.
Yeah.
What I always ask myself, where's my nervous system at right now? Which is a beautiful thing to ask because I will be like, oh, I'm being so hard on myself this week. Or things will come up in the ice that won't come up anywhere else, right? Maybe in meditation. And so how do we utilize the breath to get good at like life? And then later on, we can mess around with 42 other protocols and whatnot, right? Like we can, like yes. That's the beauty of it. It's like, there's so many, so there's always more. But like I see this when I'm working with, I've been working now more and more with athletes, which is like, shout out to anyone who's out there. University of North Carolina just brought on, first university in the country to bring on a full-time breathwork only coach football team. So shout out to people who are working with athletes and university level and training all the time, like these practices, you can poo-poo them all you want, but this is the next wave of how we put W's on the board and how we get people to navigate visualization and just manifesting and mindset to win, to do well, to have good sportsmanship. Like it really is here. And I think sometimes I have the issue coming in a female package where I'm like, I'm going to show up in pigtails to a football team and be like, yo guys, let me tell you how to breathe. Yeah. But like I worked with a UFC fighter and I felt like that. And I walked in and I was like, how am I going to teach? I was tasked and paid to just work with one person. But I knew I was going to walk into a training with 38 people. And I was like, how am I going to teach these people anything? I've never been a professional UFC fighter. I'm not an athlete at that level, right? This is all imposter syndrome and all parts of me that are also curious. I did a lot of research on UFC. I don't know how much you like it, but I was like, I don't know enough about MMA, UFC. And I walked into that 38 person training and I witnessed the first hour watching my client, watching everyone else. And I was like, there's only one guy in here who knows how to breathe well. And it was like instantaneous. I was like, oh, I'm okay. One person. And interestingly enough, had one of the better records on the team.
Yeah.
Right. And so like could see how he navigated his nervous system, see how he stayed focused. And then like really just watching everyone else and being like, there's so much for people. And if these athletes at this level are performing so well, just imagine the edge they would get if they figured out how to breathe and if they used cold to understand how to mitigate stress, right? For the swimmers, the cold simulates what it's like to be on the blocks before the whistle blows, right before they go in, right?
Okay.
So you get in the cold and then you breathe through it and you navigate that stressor, you get better at that stressor, and then you're on the blocks and it doesn't feel like as crazy.
Yeah, so I want to hear more about you working with the swim team.
Yeah.
Because we had talked about it just briefly at dinner, and I just made the assumption, you kind of work with them over a weekend to give them some tools, but no, it's a much longer period of time.
Yeah. I mean, well, SHERPA Breath and Cold, it's like SHERPA Breath and Cold Athletics is what I call it. And it's like on the website and it's we curate to what the universities or athletic organizations want. And so sometimes what you need to do, truth be told, is you need to get buy-in and they'll be like, come for 2 days. We don't really know what you're doing or if this is going to help, but come for 2 days. And you're also dealing with university athletics. When you deal with that, there's not a lot of one-on-one with the students specifically because you're not going to be alone in a room with a student athlete. It just wouldn't happen. And so how you navigate the team's personalities and where you find, let's just sweetly say, the weakest links for breathers. And the first thing I go and I work with a woman named Kim who came out of coaching at Denison, which is where we the beta tested this first. She and I went in, the first thing I did was meet with like the athletic director, all the coaches, the strength and conditioning coach, and did a presentation and then laid everybody down on the carpeted floor and said, okay, we're going to breathe these 2 styles of breathing. And, there's a little bit of like, okay, cool. Some people are excited. Some of the coaches are like, the strength and conditioning guy was like, why am I lying down? But if you can't do it, you can't teach it. And if I can't be here all the time, or you don't know if you want me here often enough, then someone's got to teach it. And so getting buy-in from the staff and then having them see a little bit of change and understanding, because surprisingly, nobody's taught about breathing in the coaching world. I mean, very few coaches at a collegiate level are. And beyond that, even in professional athletics, although changing a bit now. And then watching and then having them be like, cool, tomorrow morning, come to practice, watch the athletes, give them some, this is the other thing in the coaching world. They're like, cool, you have 5 minutes every practice. You don't get more than that. We're on the clock. We got, swims, we got relay, we got dry land. You got 5 minutes every practice. What are you going to do? It's very much like throwing down the gauntlet.
Yeah.
What are you going to do for me in 5 minutes? So we took the 5 minutes and I made a recording actually at some point. So when I left that they could run that recording most practices, and then they worked in a little bit of visualization. We bring the school psychologist in for one presentation because we did breath only the first year or 2. And then we worked in getting them cold tubs. Like this is not a thing that happens overnight. And so the first 2 years we worked in breath at 5 minutes of practice, and like happy to say that the best stats I've seen, like we did manage, especially with Denison year over year, women's team won the national championships for the first time in 23 years.
No shit.
And giving them just a bit of breath work and understanding and awareness around it. It's like we ran something called the CO2 tolerance like a breathing protocol that improves that, right? It's really improving your air hunger tolerance, but that's a story for another science podcast. And we ran them through that. And it's like when we saw students that were the student athletes that were improving anywhere from 5 to 20% on their scores for that breathing exercise, which is slightly subjective, but when we saw anywhere from 5 to 20%, there was a 69% rate of overall improvement in their races times. And when you move the needle from 5 to 20%, which you and I and someone who's untrained can get to 5 to 20% really easily, but the students that were even more passionate about it, who worked harder at it, right? Because you could just lie there and fake it, honestly, if you wanted to. And there were some students in the beginning that were like, I'm going to take a nap during this 5 minutes. I just came back from class. It's like a reset. This is bullshit. Yeah. And then all of a sudden the other students their time starting getting better. And then they're like, wait, what are you doing again?
Yeah.
And so then when we moved the needle on the people improving their air hunger tolerance from anywhere, what we would say like 20 to 40%, which is just like the next level, 95% rate of improvement on their race time. And that's like season over season. And so when you see those numbers, that's the difference to put a W on the board. That's it. And so I feel like this is a tool, and some students and the UFC fighter I worked with, it's like they were never wanting me to talk about working with them because these are like the tricks of the trade.
Oh yeah.
But the reality is like there's only one way to get people to perform at their best, and how we are not teaching athletes at any level how to breathe better and more efficiently is beyond me. Because it's not just about the game and the wins, although of course that's what everybody cares about at that level. It's about how people are navigating their other homework at school, their personal relationships, their ability to not like, I don't want to reference football, but it's like lash out and punch someone at a bar, or like the thing that's going to get them pulled from a game. Or it's understanding how to be a captain, be a leader, integrated into your team, have a collective understanding of the goals and doing teamwork. Like there's just breath is at the underpinning of all of that. Damn. So it's so cool to see those shifts. And it's so, I want to say simple, but it really requires some buy-in across the board and someone to be there to be like, hey, how can we navigate this? So I am always happy to work like season over season or one team at a time. And we continue to kind of pitch universities with this really interesting feedback that's either like, it's just breath, or like, oh, this is interesting. Like, do we want to lean in or not? Right? It's like, talk about a market disruption. And there are people globally like Dave Wood, who works with a lot of the UFC fighters and the Gracie community and stuff, that have like really nailed this breath piece. And if you watch professional fighting, usually the person who drops to mouth breathing only first is the one who's going down.
I watch a decent amount of UFC. I learn from listening to Rogan and his other guys just explain what's going on. And yeah, they always seem to remark on when someone's breathing changes. And as you were saying that you're working with the UFC, I'm like, if there's one sport that you need to be efficient with your breath, because you've got 5-minute rounds. And if it's a championship fight, it's 5-minute rounds. Like that is so much on the body that if you're not as efficient as possible with breath, like you're not going to make it.
Yeah. I looked at grappling and was like, holy, like, stuff I never really witnessed in my life as a ballerina. And I'm like, grappling, it's like, that's like more air, less effort. It's what's the minimal amount of effort that you're not getting pinned? Is that what you'd say? You're not getting pinned. But the maximal amount of like, you're still holding on so that they can't get you, and you can be focused, clear, and oxygenated enough that you can think about what your next move is. It's a chess game, right?
It's that's the other thing. Yeah, you have to be clear. And so if you're breathing up, chest breathing, and
totally
like you
go panic brain. Yeah.
Yes.
So it's so, and the other thing, I don't know, I know that these are some of the top performing athletes in the world, and the number one most challenging physical, mental, emotional job, as ranked by some agency I just pulled up, is professional dancers. And so what's really interesting about working in the professional dance set, because now I've done like 8 events with like 8 weekends with professional dancers that are working on the biggest stages in the world, like with Ariana Grande or Janet Jackson, or like just people have worked professionally for years, or even just like, some of them are probably in their early 20s, but to 45 years old, that are standing next to artists across and around the world that are making millions of dollars. And they're quite underserved, honestly, because what we don't know as humans who aren't professional dancers is that that professional dancer is like standing next to an artist making millions, but they're making like $250 to $500 a show. Their work is inconsistent. They can be easily replaced, especially women in the industry, right? Because there's just so many female dancers. So you break an arm, you're out. There's another person right behind you just waiting for your job, literally in the wings.
Oh, yeah.
And then there's a rise, it's this kind of reincorporating all the way to the back of when we began speaking, which is there's a rise that continues to exist about what you look like in the mirror as a dancer, because you're always training in the mirror, right? The choreo, what you look like, if you're giving face, if your personality is there, you're forced to be in the choreo. So that's someone else's vision of a shape that you need to be matching exactly. And then you're like, am I too fat? Am I too thin? Am I pretty enough? Am I whatever? Is that girl? It's comparison trap, right? Comparison is the thief of all joy. And all of that is going on. So if you think about someone who's like landing in Los Angeles and going to do all this professional work, the younger you are, the more impressionable you are, the harder it's going to be, the more body dysmorphia you're going to have, the more negative self-talk is going to go through your mind. And so in the course of the weekend, I'm working with this duo of like they're pretty like highfalutin, really incredible celebrity choreographers and creative directors, Brian and Scott Nicholson, and love them so dearly because they were like, let's fuck some shit up. Like, I see what you're doing and we know that there's benefit because I was doing it with them a little bit, but like, let's just go for it. We don't know. That first weekend we did with 70 dancers in LA in a studio for 3 days. It was like, I don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
We think this could go well. It's performance breathing. These are athletes. And it was like beyond anything that we could imagine when we left the weekend, because it was not only about when a dancer has 30 seconds to recover and the lights go off and they have to catch their breath or do a costume change, like giving them all the tricks for that. It's not just about training the breath overall. They did a big explosive choreo number where I made them all mouth tape to kind of land the point that they had to figure out nasal breathing and oxygenation. Like, you got to teach the people the science through the doing instead of being like the woman who comes in and says, let's talk about science for 30 minutes and everyone's falling asleep.
Yes.
And really just drove the point home over and over and over again about what your diaphragm does, how you can work, how you can recover yourself, because you still have to look the part. You can't just be like big potbelly breathing,
Yeah.
And so all of that. And then what really came out through that was not just the like athleticism and dancers saying, this changed the game for me in my everything. What really came out is like people started booking jobs more, and not because they were more physically fit, because we're treating them to do some things because they're all maladaptively training. They're dancing hours and hours a day, but things to be better athletes, that they can lay down and get better cardiovascularly, but also that they were like, oh, I believe in who I am and I'm more confident. We always end the weekend with ice baths the last day. Yeah. So I'm more confident. I believe who I am and who I am. I know that I have this edge of my breath, whether they even were doing it wildly, perfectly right, or like kind of like half-assing it, not knowing, just learning. There's a better belief structure under that dancer's armor, and they show up and they're booking gigs, and then they can add their own personality, and that like wow factor that Hollywood or these big stages and auditions are looking for comes to the surface, which like the wow factor is just like, yeah, the form of the choreo you're doing, but wow, I can really see something else. That's you, that's your flavor that shows up. And mental, emotional, there's also like this whole set of like men and women and non-binary community. Like, there's a lot of baggage. Like, we all show up with baggage, but in that community, because it's all about what you look like, there's so much baggage. And so just running a 45-minute breathwork journey to process some trauma, putting them in cold, having the experience with them, it was wild to see the level of athletic change as well as the level of like people stepping into wholeness. And that feels like I came to work with some dancers and I cried that weekend, like intermittently here and there, because you're just seeing this thing. Like, when my dad passed away, there was a piece of paper on his desk and I was cleaning out that said, like, if you could, someone else's words, but if you could only see yourself through my eyes, you'd know just how amazing you are. Oof. And it's like, that was for me, like the repeated mantra of that weekend and working with that whole dance community and just like watching them bond. And it's the same thing that sort of pervades its way through athletes when you work, because we're unpacking all the other stuff, not just the sport. And because of that, people, like, again, they become more whole. And it's like, it's just breath. I'm breathing already, Kristin. It's just an ice bath. Let me get my bros together and some beers.
Yeah.
I get it. I get it. But if you just let it be more than just the basics and you really going all the way back to the beginning of the conversation about the dentist speaking specifically intentional words and you sharing things with people in a way. This is why I'm like, I'll give away my breathwork tracks. I'll send people whatever, because I know that they'll get the job done in some way. But I also know that the way that I teach my instructors and the way that I show up for these schools and these athletes, I've spent years refining the language to try to have it land in a way that is like going to, like land deeply in their soul to be able to create change. Mm-hmm. And that's like how I want the coaches I work with to show up for their people and how I get to learn. So fortunate to be able to do this work. So we get to learn about other human beings in space, right? And then see them soar, like shining. And you're like, okay, I'm like, if I can be 1% of that person's effort of doing all the things that they're doing, like I'm not here curing anyone or making anyone amazing. I'm here to be like, here are the tools. I can teach them to you, incorporate them. And then you are going to shine brighter than you ever have. That's what you're here for. That's what I'm here for. That's what a big part of, I hope, the collective consciousness is here for.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I know it's just sport, but it's so much more.
It is so much more. And I'm just curious, I've had an experience with breath work throughout the last number of years, and it's just hasn't been something that's stuck for me. And I'm sure that's quite common. And what do you think that is for people like me?
You mean like they do breath? And I listened to you and Luke talking about, and Luke was like, you were at some event or something and you but you were interviewing him. And then Luke was like, they said there was breath work coming and I wanted to go lock myself in the car. I was like, it's like, we all have resistance to things. But do you mean that like when you've gone to do breath work, you're like, it doesn't fully land or?
No, I always feel better after, but it's like, it's the going into it. It's like, oh, there's am I going to do it right? That's usually a big one for me.
Yeah.
Which is on some level just so silly.
Yeah.
That's
hopefully a good facilitator is going to say right in the beginning, there's no right or wrong way to do this. The truth is there is a biomechanical correct way to do it, but we would never say that in a class.
Yeah. Whenever I've done it consistently, I have felt good, like in, kind of upon waking. And I guess part of it is I've gotten somewhat bored with it. So maybe it's not dynamic enough in that it's the same protocol each time. And there's probably a lack of understanding about why this versus that, which is on me to better understand.
Yeah, or just asking around. I bet I know a lot of the people that like you'd be like, yo, what's your favorite breathwork protocol? Like if you made it something that felt juicier. But the other like preconceived notion is like, okay, I'm going to do breathwork. Hold on. Clear the space, smudge the room. I need 45 minutes. Let me put on something that makes me feel sensual. I don't know. Like, let me get my crystal out. Or if I showed up like that to a university, they would be like, there's the door. Yeah. Right. Hold on. I have my amethyst with me. Yeah. Or my big Austin hat. So, I think it's like, all it really takes is 5 minutes. Like we can make time to meditate. And I do this with clients a lot where I'm like, if you can't quite get the meditation in, like, please get the breath work in.
Yeah.
And anyone who's listening to this, I'm also like happy to send like the secret breathing track I have, or like there's downloadable stuff on SHERPA Breath and Cold where you can go and download like a guided beginner breathwork track for free, a guided ice bath track for free. So then if you want to be a weirdo and have me in your voice, like step into the cold, I'm like there for it. But there's so many apps. There's so many, like even me as someone who's doing breathwork every single day, I am not doing a 45-minute journey every day, but I'm like, okay, let me get on YouTube and see what's out there. Like the best way for me to see all the different styles is to see all the different styles. Like what is, what's going on with pranayamic breath? What did I miss in my 8 years of yoga training? So my breath work runs really deep because I was teaching yoga in New York 20 years ago. It was like a side gig with my corporate job, making, $30 a class if I was lucky. But breathing and meditation and all that stuff came into play, lots of pranayamic style breathing. and understanding where the yogis kind of got it right in many ways, and like where new age yogis who westernized it could have gotten it wrong, and understanding vagal tone, which continues to be a thing that unfolds because it's such like a trending thing to be like, rub your neck and breathe deep and like activate your vagus nerve and you'll be fine. And it's like, well, the reality, I just interviewed Gil Headley, so it's very fresh in my mind. The reality is like our vagus nerve doesn't just activate parasympathetic tone. It actually, it's very, very heavily involved in freeze and fawn. And so those are not down regulatory parts of our nervous system. So, understanding those things, it's not to take away from anybody's fun. That's like, rub your neck and feel all good. Like, sure, rub your neck and feel good. There's 42 sensations probably that are helping you feel good, especially if you're like rubbing your lover's neck or whatever. But really getting a grasp of what are the cool things that we can do and play with, and what things, there's plenty of times that I'm like, pull up a breath work and then be like, don't like this. Like last week or something, I will go to YouTube and Breathing with Sandy, I think that's his name. He's like millions of followers. When he's just like, does like Sufi breathing, does other things, always with a beautiful landscape. And I'm like, this is really pretty to look at and quite enviable. Like he gets to travel around the world like this. And just this is his whole gig, right? As he just has this millions of followers on YouTube, but he's helping people with different breathing landscapes, like protocols that they can do. And some are short, and some are long. And it's a lot more sort of ethereal, open kind of breathwork styles. But like there's so many different, like DMT or someone in their basement, or all the different styles of breathwork you can just go and pull off and see. And it's just fun sometimes to do it with someone on a YouTube thing that's 10 minutes long. And you're like, cool, that was it. When plenty of days I'm like, I don't want to hear anyone's voice. I just want to like practice a little of like secret breathing or something that I'm tuned into or I need. And then that's it.
Well, we'll certainly link to all your stuff in the show notes, the breath work and
and anytime you're going to have like the men's group, I'm like so ready to come and be like, let's do a breathing session that doesn't feel like we're doing anything or you can do anything wrong.
Oh, done. Done deal. Yeah. Tell me how sauna fits into this for you.
Yeah, I flew to England because there's not a lot of training in sauna to get a beginner sauna certification, which includes like Aufgas, which is like towel waving and aromatherapy and all of this that like you add into the landscape of sauna. The towel waving is, although it looks interesting and pretty in many ways, it's not about that. It's really about circulating the heat so that people can stay in longer or they feel more comfortable, or like you're moving the heat around the space, or perhaps if it's not warm enough, like getting more heat to like rise or circulate around the room. But sauna for me is, you asked about the cold plunge and training and things like that. I think sauna, because it's like a mimicked cardio experience, I think sauna is great for detox. Suzanne Soberg would say 57 minutes a week is exactly what you need. I think it's like, great. Putting in an hour over the course of the week feels good for all-cause mortality. We have so much research on sauna and reduction of all-cause mortality, like helping you live longer, that I think it's an important part of it. I'm super pro sauna, and I usually do it after strength training. So it's just like an unwind, especially if I feel or lazy, don't want to do cardio that day. Then I'm going to go have that experience. And also like, for me, I prefer like a super hot, like barrel sauna or, wood firing sauna, something that's not a red light sauna or, infrared sauna. And it's preference. I want it to be hot enough to activate heat shock proteins. Just like I like cold water, I think, be under 42 degrees, which is sort of where we see cold shock proteins activate. And the better these proteins fold in the body, the better our cells can communicate with each other. It's not to say you can't start, cooler or warmer or whatever, but really trying to get the longevity benefits as like a quote unquote biohacker. I want all the longevity benefits. And so, saunas, it's SHERPA Breath and Cold because most people don't need coaxing to get in the sauna. People are like, right. Sauna, amazing,
That's cool.
So sauna, and I think it could be really relaxing. I think it's a truth barrel, right? So you get in there and you have some real strong conversations about like, you cut to the chase. I used to work at Deuce Gym with Sauna and Cold, their program there in LA. And there's a sign next to the sauna that says all stories must have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Because people will be like, I'm too hot, I'm leaving. And they're like, what happened in that story?
Yeah.
But sauna, there's so many different ways to slice it and to breathe into it and to, again, dose your stress by dosing heat, dosing the way you breathe. And giving yourself time and temperature to adjust to that. And we can shift our state pretty greatly in there as well.
And where do you generally incorporate the cold in your day?
I like cold. If I'm going to strength train, I'll do it beforehand, which everyone will say like, but it's so annoying. You have to like put on your cold and then you're wet and then you're on your training on the machines or the weights or whatever. Yes. And so I like it on a rest day and I like it pre-training strength training. And then the one question that you asked that was about what about after and all the things. So Dr. Mike T. Nelson is a super nerd and a friend of mine, and he's done a decent amount of research that's like, for anyone who's not like bodybuilding and going into competition, like who might be worried about it, if you were to do like hey, I was in the cold plunge and then I worked out and I'm hot and sweaty and I want to like take a dip again or whatever, you could kind of take a quick dip for 30 seconds or less and not really affect the hypertrophy that you are pushing. So it is possible to go and be like, okay, quick dip, but I just think, why stunt the work you just did? And like, it's so hard for many of us to get to the gym regularly. Why stunt the work at all? And if you're like, oh my God, I really want a cold plunge, then like do it, it's fine. But this is the same thing when people contrast. So they go from cold to hot.
Yeah.
And it's awesome. Like, again, do what you want with your body. But if you just spent, especially in the cold, 4 minutes in the ice bath and it was hard for you and you breathe yourself through it and you're like proud of yourself and you get out, then why would you run right from the cold into the sauna? Because then you're letting the machine, the sauna, the heat do the work that your body should be doing in order to get the benefit. So I'm always like, take 5 minutes between modalities, between the hot and the cold. You want to have the shiver response. That's the big signal. You want to have all the things that happen with the cascade and parasympathetic rebound. So you can kind of feel into what just happened to me and then get in the sauna. And like, by the way, if you're like in the middle of an ice cap somewhere and you're like, oh, I'm not going to go into the warm sauna because I want to take the 5 minutes, like get into the sauna so you don't go hypothermic. But if you're in like one of these like comfy, I'm not on it. It's like a sauna and cold plunge right there and a shower and anything I could ever want. I know where my heat source is. I'm going to do some time in the cold. I'm going to make sure that it's giving me a shiver response because I know that that's where my dose of stress wants to be. And then after that calms, then I'll get in the sauna. And conversely, you just heated your body up in the sauna and got all sweaty and detoxed and whatnot. Take 5 minutes and let your body do the work to cool down before you throw yourself in the cold plunge. Like, oh, it's actually easier to do a cold plunge after I was sitting in 200 degrees.
Oh, that's so, yeah.
Yeah.
It is way easier.
Yeah. And for the love of God, add a little aromatherapy to water if you're allowed in your sauna. Otherwise, it's just like a sweaty men's locker room. Okay.
I do have a little bit, but I need to do a better job with it. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
All right. So there are many different ways to follow you and your work on Instagram and kind of on the web. So can you unpack that for us?
Yeah, for sure. I do a really bad job. People are like, what exactly do you do all the things? So I have a podcast called Well Power Podcast, which is a decent amount of like, lately anyway, about nervous system and breath and cold, some visionaries there, training and whatnot. So that's like low cost, no cost information for people. And then SHERPA Breath and Cold is the website, and you can find more information on programs, certifications. I run a coaching certification there, athletic programs. And and then I'm at biohacking.breath.cold on the Instagram and Breath and Cold on TikTok. But mostly I'm on Instagram there, even though SHERPA Breath and Cold has a handle. It's just like I get to do all the fun stuff on the biohacking handle. So people can find me. I'm still the girl who answers all my own DMs and messages and things like that. And anything you want, just tell me. Write me and ask me for all my recordings. I spend thousands of dollars on making recordings in a studio.
Yeah.
And I want to share them. Like that's the point, right?
All right. So reach out. What does the certification weekend look like?
So it's 2 days, 8 to 6, 8:30 in the morning to 6 at night. This weekend I'm doing St. Louis, which is very exciting. Sold out training. It's about 12 to 14 people. And it is ACE, AFA, NASM, CanFit Pro accredited for all the nerdy coaches out there who want to keep their accreditation.
Yeah.
And it is an opportunity to sit in a framework. So understanding everything about breath and cold as it correlates to nervous system so that you're not forced to do any kind of specific method, but it's a framework to unpack the nervous system within those spaces and to learn how to coach people with, the deliciousness that I think needs to come with coaching, the things like we talked about, from the dentist to using language to how we make people feel safe, right? Asking people the question, are you feeling safe right now? And having them be like, hell yeah. And I want to try this new thing. So teach backs. And then at the end of the weekend, we bring in a bunch of strangers, volunteers, new friends. I don't know what to call them. And everybody coaches someone new through the cold that they haven't met before.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Love that.
Yeah. Super fun. And
okay. So what else do you have? So this will come out. Not sure exactly when. Do you have other ones scheduled?
I have a whole slew coming. It's the last one of this year, a whole slew of them coming in. It's all listed on the website in 2025. And a program that's coming out for general population, which is sort of inspired by our dinner, actually.
Oh, hell yeah.
A program that is around breath and cold for anxiety, depression, and loneliness.
Awesome.
Yeah. So I had a long chat with Mark Groves,
yes.
who's a dear man and friend of yours and ours. And I think it's just so much needed in the world of navigating. He navigates relationships like nobody's business, right?
Yeah.
And so I just said, I'm going to put together this program and do a little breathwork track for his audience and get people to feel what it feels like to be with themselves and the understanding that there is so much greatness and knowing that these things that arise for us, this like future casting and the anxiety and the lowness, whether that's depression or loneliness, we can pass through it. And I think we don't know. I think when we're in the thick of it, and you have probably had experiences like this in your life. I know from the story of the whole Vegas shooting, you hit a place and you're like, I know that I shouldn't be in this space right now, or I can rise out of this, but for some reason I feel so stuck. And so that's, it's become a big passion of mine as I'm going through my own challenges with those things. And I want people to feel better, faster. Yeah. So more to come on that. Very exciting.
I love it. Yeah. I loved having you on. It was great to see you again. I knew it was going to be great, but I love the work you're doing.
Thanks so much.
Yeah,
thanks for having me.
Oh, yeah.